Good, well, I don't have my agenda in front of me. Look at that. It's good afternoon, right? Today on what, May 6th, is it already? Something like that. 2025 afternoon session for House Transportation. You'll see that like on the floor, like across the building, things can change at a moment's notice in this portion of the session. So what you think you're going to be spending time on and whatnot can change very quickly. So what we are going to do, Representative Burke and Representative Corcoran and myself just came back from the first meeting of the Committee of Conference on H488, the transportation bill. And our legislative council basically walked everybody through the entire side-by-side, which you have a copy of. I'm going to turn it over for a little bit of highlight what you think might be the biggest areas of contention in terms without going through the whole thing, the pieces that we probably are going to next. And that'll give people a chance to weigh in. And then if Representative Burke or Representative Corcoran have anything to add about what we went through this morning. So just to keep the committee updated is the point of this next bit. Yes, the agenda had something else on it, but that completely changed in the last 24 hours. So check your emails and we'll go from there. Good afternoon. Again.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Damian Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. So we had I would say a cordial start to the conference committee on the T-bill, which is always good. It is not always that way. So this is great. So that they walk through the differences. Some of the highlights are the unobligated transportation fund dollars that we talked about that might be going away. That was in section 3 of the Senate bill. Would it help if I had the side-by-side up as I go through this?
Trying to figure out what.
All right.
That's what we have a side-by-side. We do have a side-by-side, but we can put it up. And while he's doing that, I will mention that Senator White was our host in the Senate Transportation Committee room. Chair Westman was out today and may or may not be out tomorrow, which won't delay things. So Senator White, the vice chair, ran the meeting. Senator Perchulik is the third senator in the conference committee on that side. And then there were 4 or 5 other people in the room, mostly Agency of Transportation.
It is on the committee website, but it's also up here. It would be last Friday.
That's from
Or Thursday, whichever day I walk through it with the committee. It's also under my name on the committee website. So the first piece is just that this unobligated fund balance in the transportation fund that the Senate added in is basically to pay for the revenue reductions in S46 and the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill. It may be able to go away depending on what you do with the motor vehicle bill. So that was sort of the first highlight. The next highlight here, I would say, is that as I understand it, the sides are far apart on the issue of whether or not to keep the 10G reports or to replace them with a graphical dashboard that provides slightly different and reduced information versus the current reports. So
I don't mind if I'll add my 2 cents on the piece. You mentioned the section 3, the 686,000. Because we met with the loggers and we as a committee decided not to take up S46, that was 300,000. And the section in the miscellaneous DMV bill regarding the SSI and the SSDI that we tabled until next year to look at again, potentially, is another 300. And that is where the 600, on a simple level, that's where the 686,000 that was set aside to potentially pay for those. And we as a committee are not, have voted not to work on those. So that's where that comes from. And then moves us into the dashboard and 10G, which for this part would be at least 1 year of overlap where you would see both of them. But the intention for the Senate was to get rid of the 10G report and replace it with a new dashboard. So that was my take on what I saw so far. Representative Powell?
And is that dashboard gonna have the same information that we have in the 10G report?
No, not even close. We're holding firm on that. Don't worry.
So it's the dashboard is a graphical representation of delays of more than 1 year, or projects that have been delayed by more than 1 year from the preliminary plan completion date versus those that haven't, and projects that are $5 million or 50% over budget, whichever is less from the preliminary cost estimate, versus the 10G reports, which are all new projects, all projects that were in construction last year for which there's no funding in this year's transportation program, which either means they were finished or they were halted for one reason or another. And then two different cost overage parts. One is over by $5 million or more than 75% from the estimate in the prior fiscal year. And then the other is increased by $10 million or more than 100% from the preliminary plan estimate. The one thing that the dashboard has that the 10G reports don't is the delays by more than 1 year. The 10G reports themselves look at new projects, ended projects, and these cost overages. So there's a slight difference. The other piece is the 10G reports are granular. It's line by line, project by project. The dashboard is a holistic overview. Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, where did this idea come from? Is it a Senate idea? Is it from the?
So it came out of discussions in the Senate based on, there was an auditor's report on over budget, overtime projects at the agency. And there was discussion of how can we track these, and AOT came back with the proposal for the dashboard language. I don't know if the committee specifically requested the dashboard or requested that they just come in with a proposed solution.
So they added some additional information based on the auditor and said, we'll do it in a dashboard. Then did somebody say, oh, well, we won't need the 10G anymore?
Yes. The Senate, I'm trying to paraphrase this without, so they felt that the 10G reports are frequently overlooked and too granular to be helpful.
Thank you.
So,
But I like just to remind new members, we looked at that auditor's report last year and we specifically amended the 10G reports to accommodate that report by the auditor. So that's why I'm pretty firm that it's staying, but we responded to that report. I don't know why they're just looking at that this year because it came out last year. But anyways, I thought it was there.
let's see. Yeah, I think the parties are pretty, I at least get the sense that the parties are pretty okay, or at least that the House doesn't have objections to the Senate's technical corrections on the rail trails. I don't want to speak for you, but I didn't get the sense that that was an issue, or to the language changes around Green Mountain Transit. Or if there are objections, they're not significant. Was my impression.
We can see that on page or on chapter, or what's Senate version, section 13, House version 9, right? Chapter
13. Here you go. It's up on the screen.
The way it was described to us is more about the technical piece versus substantive. It's not substantial. What did you say? Substantial?
It's a substantive change. It's more of a technical change.
Green Mountain Transit wanted to highlight, because of their financing, because of their federal involvement, urban is an important word to them regarding to their federal funding, and they want to make that very clear.
Yeah, their federal funding is tied to services provided in the urbanized area of Chittenden County, as that is determined by the US Census Bureau. The language here doesn't actually affect any existing routes or levels of service. just reflects what they get funding for. And then beyond that, if they're going to provide service outside of that area that's covered by federal funding, that would be subject to AOT approval. And so that's kind of reflects exactly what you said, that Green Mountain Transit may operate service outside of Chittenden County or demand response within Chittenden County as determined by AOT's public transit grant process. This isn't saying fixed route service. It's just saying area of operation is in urbanized areas. So that allows for demand response transit within that area. And then operating service outside that area, subject to approval of AOT. And then the last sentence the Senate added is more of a clarifier, because there were concerns that although this is the charter for Green Mountain Transit, so legally it should not affect the other public transit agencies, there were concerns that with the change in this language, it could reflect an intent not to allow them to serve Chittenden County. And so the last sentence was added just to say, just to be clear, we're not saying that the other transit providers can't, for example, run commuter service from Washington County into Chittenden County or from Rutland and Addison County into Chittenden County. So,
Would it be fair to say, Damien, that we're trying to say that Green Mountain Transit does operate in the urban area, but can operate elsewhere, and other providers can operate there, and that we're not limiting their geographic or potential scope, that they can bid or with approval of the Agency of Transportation get involved? Should Green Mountain Transit want to be involved basically anywhere in the state, they could be.
exactly. And that's,
And vice versa.
yeah, and that's just like what we discussed here when you were voting out the first version of the T-bill.
Okay. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so that's why I would characterize this as more technical rather than substantive. Okay. Lot of similarity.
Everything's the same there until.
The next were these different reports, and I don't know that I've got a real strong sense of feelings about yay or nay on the different reports. So I would, unless the conference committee members want to add something on these different reports or have me just highlight them again.
On section 15, we took some testimony
Yes.
about cancellation of the reports, and we're really looking for the agency, League of Cities and Towns, the planners, RBC to. Well, I recall it, the agency felt they had a process, they wanted some update to it. Then the other people we brought in to say what's their side of it, they wanted more of a complete review of it, and we sort of went back and forth and said, in effect, we took it out of the bill saying, why don't you guys get together
Right.
and solve it? And my perception of this section being added by the Senate is them in effect saying, get together and try to solve it. Whereas we sort of said it more informally saying, get together and solve it. I think they're putting it in the bill to say, get together and solve it. Is that fair to, is that a
They'll give us.
layman's interpretation of what they're doing here?
That is a good layman's interpretation. The only other thing to note is that part of this too included AOT indicating that they would use some of their program development dollars to pay for a consultant to facilitate the process. And so that you'll see that actually in all three of these reports. AOT proposed language that included engaging a consultant to facilitate the process.
If anybody has any other questions about that or comments, we'll certainly hear it any down the road or anywhere. So we chose to leave it out. They added it in.
The next two, 16 and 17, were Senate additions based on proposals from the AOT. The first is inventorying and assessing sort of a system to develop prioritization of municipal needs for transit support or for transportation funding support. And then the second one is trying to look at the state town highway aid and grant programs to see if there are efficiencies, and I didn't get the sense that there's a strong objection to these. There might be some tweaking, but again, I would stand corrected if the conference committee members wish to.
The section 16, they're saying they're gonna give them 2 years to put it together. It doesn't require them to update us, or I'm sure we can just ask for an update or not, but
Yeah, so that they agency proposed a 2-year process because this work would be fairly involved. And they didn't want to have too much stacked up for next January.
Representative Burke?
Yeah, this sounds pretty positive for towns. In terms of if they're getting more involved. Would you say?
I think that for me, that was an interesting part. It seems like a huge undertaking to, in effect, and we're not saying creating a gigantic whiteboard, a white book for the entire state. In effect, every asset or every project that the town needs, and in fact, finding a way to inventory it, catalog it, and prioritize it. That's a massive undertaking.
there are some,
but it would bring big
You know, it might be
visibility.
that there are some, just thinking about my town, where, class 1 town highways that are like on the interstate highway system, that they might want to have a little more attention to.
It's a,
So, oh, go ahead.
I mean, I'm just reading this as not that they're doing all of that work, but they are setting up practices, a framework for a system, developing a prioritization process
Which we have.
but for municipalities. So that already exists,
Prioritization.
for the state.
Yeah, but for state projects.
but for the local.
But yeah, they're talking about doing what we do for state projects, for municipal projects.
Which I agree, I think it's positive, and I think maybe Representative
Yeah,
Dutch.
yeah, so we did talk about infrastructure grants. And in the end, I got back from the AOT was that each town gets in line, and when that they sort of dole out projects based on a fair process, each town gets something. And this would say, hey, maybe there's a town or two that, comes to the top of the list, and they're gonna, because of some more priority rather than just, because, they had said Heinsberg, well, you'll probably get it in 3 more years. It has nothing to do with how bad it might be needed or not needed. It's sort of doled out that way.
And
This might be a different way to do it.
And this isn't saying they would have all that work done. They're saying they would have a recommendation or a process of how to go about it. My understanding from Senator Westman is that everybody agrees there should be more money for towns, but there's no clear way of prioritizing what that is. We divide out money by mileage, we divide out money by grant applications, but we don't have a measurement of what's priority, is what he was trying to say, and he wants them to come up with a way to, in effect, assist the towns to come up with, which is what you're sort of saying, Representative Burke, that might be a good thing to see, but boy, it points me to the question of, we do have the white book and we have what's online, but we don't know what's going in the white book for next year. We don't know exactly how that's picked. There is a scoring system, et cetera, but I'm not sure that we see it or that we have any visibility to it. And how are we gonna have, that's a big, wide area of projects to be figuring out how to prioritize. I can see some value in walking down that process, but you think we have a big white book now and having the size of what it would be for all the town.
Yeah.
Separate, we'd have to get a different color.
That's one thing that agencies cut away from when they're supposed to do it by statute is in their book. There's supposed to be a number next to the project to tell you where it was in the prioritization. And they just stuck it.
Interesting.
Nothing you would notice.
Yeah, well, I hear back from our RPCs that the agencies are not even in a spot to really take a ton of feedback right now because they have so many projects to work on that we're not reprioritizing this year. But we're not doing a review of prioritizations. I don't know what you guys hear from your regional planning commissions, but I'm not hearing that the project list is full already. That asking for new clarification is not.
It's more about the money. It's not like, it's all about money. I never heard of my political perspective. It's like, we need prioritization. It's more, can you give us more money? I think they're fine with the rotation in some sense.
Yeah, I
Maybe
mean,
some are,
it's
some
fair, but it does seem, we know every town's different too.
Yeah.
Some towns have capacity to like study their culverts and bridges and all that. Others don't. Some may have been wiped out by some storms and, they're just trying to patch things together. It might be interesting to have somebody sort of step back and, look at the big picture and sort of be able to point, at least identify the 5 or 10 critical things that really should happen this year. So not wait in line. And then measure the priority against how much that particular road connects to other transportation things. There might be a bottleneck there that, that one has, even though it's a town road, it has high priority versus other town roads. I don't know. I mean, it seems, I don't like the idea where you just wait in line. I mean, it's fair. If you don't have any data, that's a fair way to do it.
This makes intuitive good sense to me. When I worked as a zoning administrator in the town of Westford, I had to help update the hazard mitigation plan for the town. And so spent a lot of time, a lot of which had to do in that very rural town with the roads. And this kind of approach would have been extremely helpful. It was, I was worked for the town for some time, and there was a very talented road foreman that we had for some years, and then we also had somebody who really was struggled in that role, and there were big impacts to the town in how the town was able to deliver services for residents. So I think, taking away, leaving some of that up to chance makes some sense. Because, capacity is a real challenge, particularly in a lot of our rural towns. And it really plays out particularly when you have dirt roads and, flood hazard situations that you're trying to navigate.
I mean, I guess I say I totally agree with that 100%, but the way I'm looking at this in my mind is we're creating a whole nother department. You think of the staff that goes in to the state's prioritization and the departments that they have to rank that. Now we're saying, all right, we're going to do that on the town level. How do you do that? I mean, you're creating, I think, a whole nother branch to come up with that data. That's what my concern is like, what are we doing?
I think it could just be as simple as some best management practices.
That, but it sound like they want to rank it. I mean, if they want a system like this prioritization on a state level, that's a whole nother ball of wax. But if it's just like that, then that's fine. Yeah.
And how much money is that gonna cost? Would it be better to just allocate the money to the
Yeah,
town? I
yeah.
don't know,
Yeah.
or, increase the size of the grants or something.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, the whole thing of the town's capacity. And we might need the expertise of the agency.
Yeah.
They're gonna spend 2 years putting this together, is what this proposes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2 years putting it together. I don't know if it's appropriate that maybe we have somebody from the agency come in and tell us a little bit more about what their interpretation of this is.
About it
Yeah.
and see what it's gonna cost and where did this come from and what.
We want to hear more about it anyway, either way.
Essentially, I'm fine with that. I just don't know how it's gonna
Yeah,
play out.
yeah, we should know
It
more
does seem
about
like
it.
a lot of work.
Yeah.
It might be good, but it
Yeah.
does seem like a lot of work.
I also think it may be a bit redundant because you have the planning commissions working with AOT, right? I mean, that's the structure that we're supposed to have, that's supposed to work. So it would seem to me within that context, you would be prioritizing within the county. But Maybe
Maybe
that's,
that's the structure that they would come up with.
I'd want to make sure they did, because I think it's redundant.
Always done, a little bit more about 16, 17 perhaps. 15, 16, 17, or maybe the 16, 17, we already heard plenty on 15. Okay. Mileage-based user fee, section 27.
So sections 11 and 18 are our bill, 27 through 29, and the 2023 T-bill is what we're amending. Big differences between the two bodies on this are, one, the anticipated date of implementation. Senate has January 1, 2027. House has July 1, 2026, which would be presumably shortly after the close of next session. So it's really about a 6-month difference in lead time, assuming everything is running on schedule. There is some other tweaking in the intent language here. I don't know that this is super substantive. Right here in numbers 3 and 4. But again, if there are concerns about this language, I'm happy to go into it a little more deeply. So I've highlighted it up there.
Well, just our order, I think it just got stapled wrong because it went from 18 to 27. Our pages are, I think that's stapled wrong.
So section 27
Yeah.
is in section 18. That's a confusing thing. We're amending.
Of course.
All right.
There's your one.
Silly.
Yes. Write that down, Bill. Use that.
Right.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's what I was.
Section 18 is in section 27.
Right. So what's on second? Right. John first.
George Washington, Nate Briganti. Yeah.
Doesn't seem like, other than the date, the rest of it just seems.
Yeah, the rest of it is they wanted to tweak the language, but I don't think it makes a huge difference in the overall intent. The one thing I highlighted for the Senate, which I'll highlight for you as well, is this language here about supplanting lost fuel tax revenue from out-of-state plug-in electric vehicles traveling in Vermont. Anytime we talk about taxing out-of-state but not in-state, it raises constitutional concerns for me. So whatever you do with this would have to be structured carefully to ensure that you're not trying to disproportionately shift the burden in a way that restricts interstate travel or interstate commerce. But it's not to say that intent language that says this is unconstitutional. It just raises flags that if your goal is to capture that lost revenue from out-of-state plug-in electric vehicles, we just have to be careful about how we do it to make sure that we address that.
It might be possible because if we have mileage-based user fee for in-state people, then you can't tax them again, right?
Right. So you could set up something where, for example, if there are a couple of different things that I can see and not having analyzed all this, but you could set up something which basically says that you're capturing some of that lost revenue with a surcharge at the charging station, and that that can be credited against mileage-based user fee or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Something like that could potentially work. But it, again, and then that gets into the issue of there are electric vehicle users who do all their charging at home. There are electric vehicle users who do all their charging at public stations, and there are folks who are in the middle who do both. So,
Are you saying the wording of the Senate's thing?
it is not a problem here. I just am flagging it as something you need to think about if we get to it in the future. So putting you on the same, this is something I've got to keep on the back burner of my brain for next year or the year after, whenever it comes up.
And I guess the way I look at this section is around $3 million. From going from July to January 1st. I think that would be a potential loss revenue, everyone see.
And I think
Just put that up.
the public is under the mindset that's, it's now May of 2025, and we're saying it's at least January of 2027 at the minimum before we'll be collecting a mileage-based user fee. And the General Assembly passed a while ago, said that we were going to be collecting it almost by now.
But we do have
And it
the,
just keeps going
we
on.
do have the infrastructure fee that's being collected in lieu of this.
Which doesn't help, which doesn't help fix the
No,
road.
I'm saying,
No, that
Looking
is
at my
true.
transportation
Yeah.
dollars, it doesn't go to helping the road. And it does help build out the electrical infrastructure, but it doesn't help the road. And we're more than 18 more months before we will have a fee that'll be helping pay for the road.
Do we understand the
That bothers
logic
me.
that the Senate put it 6 months ahead?
They're basically, I would assume that they're saying there's just no way without having gotten the grant, that they're not going to be set up in program. It's not clear based on the piece of registration or inspection. Are we going to be collecting the mileage on inspections and whatnot so that we can charge the fee? The program's not built.
Right.
And we don't have the money. They think we're getting it now, which is part of why they're taking the 1.1 million that Probst put in for mileage-based user fee, and they're taking that out because they're saying that we're pretty sure now we're going to get the grant. But while this is all delayed, we're not going to be seeing transportation revenues. I do appreciate that the electric vehicle are paying a fee, and I do appreciate that it's helping build out the infrastructure. I'm just sticking back to the biggest theme we've had since we've been here, which is we don't have any T-fund money, and we just have been told here that we're a chunk that we had been hoping for a while is still very much on the hope list for quite a while.
Yeah. DNV, AOT, for whatever, what I remember hearing was that they were able to build that out based on the House idea. In other words, they were ready to do this, and there wasn't a
It's a
structure.
recommendation, yeah.
Yeah.
So the Senate's concern was that July 1, 26 was going to put us too tight on implementation, given the timing of the funding, and given just the idea that if we're going to be setting by legislation the actual rates and any enabling language, that if there's a need to adopt rules or anything else like that, there wouldn't be enough time. So they wanted to build in an additional 6 months of lead time to allow for implementation. That said, I think there are concerns about timing, but I can't speak for the agency. That is their thinking was that they wanted to build in more of a cushion to make sure that it could actually be implemented on time.
That puts a few different things, because we told our House Appropriations Committee that we, with their money and help, would get it done in the time frame. And now we're saying, thanks, we don't need the money, but it is going to wait 6 more months. It also says in here that we're going to come back as a General Assembly and decide what the amount of the fee and specifically is, and then put additional legislation for that, which
that was already in the existing language. They added that again because of concerns of one of the committee members about how the fee would impact the committee members' constituents. And wanting to be extra clear that we weren't going to let AOT set the fee without legislative input. So if you look back,
I think ours had the same. I mean, it didn't authorize the agency to set the fee, did it?
so the original language is to not commence collecting a mileage-based user fee until such authorizing language is codified in statute and becomes effective. And the Senate committee member who was concerned about the rates was concerned that this did not clearly say that the legislature would be the one establishing the amount of the fee, and didn't want to cede that ground. And so they proposed this revision here. So, and it's also unless we grant them that authority in statute, which we haven't, the agency couldn't set the fee on their own anyway. They don't have that legal authority to do that.
I'm sure there's some other programs out there where the legislature has ceded that authority to set rates to
We
other
certainly
unelected
have,
government body, haven't we?
but we have to do it expressly. So we do that. We do tend to come back though when it's we have fee bills periodically, tax bills, yield bills, etc. But we have set other things up as basically a self-executing, here's the formula you apply agency, and you make the adjustment from year to year, whether it's the CPI or something else. But generally we have legislation that sets those guardrails. So
the Senate also took out where we had said, hey, electric vehicles pay the state tax, but there is no federal gas tax right now. I'm sorry, there's no. We want it to be comparable to an internal combustion engine paying, and there was a suggestion that we could. Our law, our portion said, based on a state and federal amount, and they took out the federal portion.
Right. And that's here in section 12 of the House, 19 of the Senate. The House said state and federal government are amount collected by the state and federal government in gas tax revenue. Fuel tax is probably more appropriate because we have diesel vehicles as well. That was my drafting error. But then they added the word average in front of amount, which I don't think is a huge difference, but then they swapped to state instead of state and federal.
I have a problem with the average.
Okay.
Because if I took an average of, it's really an average of miles per gallon of all the vehicles. And so you go from one end of, 15 miles or 20 miles to a gallon to my Prius C 55.
Right.
I don't want my battery electric, which is efficient, to be in the middle. I would think they would be considered one of the higher efficiency vehicles. So while it might lose fees, it doesn't seem like we want to encourage people to buy battery electric vehicles. Pay your gas tax, but if it's I just don't know if it's the average is the right one. I think it takes a little bit of looking and discussing. And here they're saying average.
So that's a good point. I didn't think so.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I was gonna also say, I wonder what why Senate would not want to do this with the federal portion.
We found out today on the EVs on the federal level are gonna have a
Huge tax,
$200 charge.
50.
So they will be getting hit, or 250, so that's coming in the near future if they're past their budget, so that sort of takes the federal issue out, or at least mine.
Passed the Senate yet? Or I know it was in the House.
I was told it was in the House and it's gonna be in the budget reconciliation process. I don't know, it's gonna sugar out, but it sounds like it's gonna become a rally.
Are you talking about?
No.
The Senate is essentially going to start charging its own EV infrastructure fee.
Yeah,
In lieu of doing a mileage-based fee or something like that, because they have privacy concerns about how to implement a federal mileage-based fee. And they're not sure how to do it. And so in lieu of that, they're going to be assessing. And I'm not sure how that will be assessed, whether it'll be, something you pay on April 15th or something else, but they're going to assess some sort of EV infrastructure fee to feed the federal highway fund.
It just seems like the federal gas tax has not been raised since 1993, and if they're willing to do the other, I don't know, just.
That argument has been raised by some members of Congress, so they are not the majority.
And I'm just sort of saying $250 is far more than most people would pay driving any vehicle federal tax, I would guess.
I don't
It's
know.
only 18 cents. Our Vermont's, right, is higher.
yeah,
And we saw some averages of $125, $140 a year for Vermont drivers. So it seems $250 would be twice that. And you might only be driving 5,000 miles.
You know
Doesn't seem
why?
very fair, but that's not in our bill.
no, it's not in our bill, but I just thought that was a reason why that was
Yes.
taken off
Yeah.
the table, but no, I agree with you, that's probably high, but we start high in the, who knows?
Raise the other chance. Yeah. All right.
So this section that you're about to go into, I have a concern or an area I'd like to hear other people's opinion. On the top of that page right there, the mileage-based user fee for
Sorry about that.
EV pleasure cars will be an interim step towards gradually expanding the mileage-based user fee to all motor vehicles. So if I'm going to go to a mileage-based user fee, we're talking about charging people for however far they drive, however much activity. Is that what that means? However far they go.
Yeah, which is what happens now. They pay gas tax for how far they drive.
The efficiency drive. If I have a gas vehicle and I want to drive as far as I can drive, it's my gas or electric, I would want the highest efficiency. I'm sorry, on a gas version, I want the highest efficiency. If I want, my goal is to drive as many miles as I want or go wherever activity calls me. If I am paying for an internal combustion engine, the goal would be to have the most efficient possible. Right? You have the most efficient in terms of saving money. So your efficiency or miles per gallon is a big deal. And my activity is not the driver, my efficiency is potentially the efficiency of the vehicle as the driver. But if you're measuring my mileage in terms of how far I go is how much I pay, is that really what we're after? That we are judging what people's activity and their economic driver is versus trying to drive the efficiency of the vehicle. I'm not saying I've thought this all out, but I'm very concerned. My initial reaction now that I've had a few days and I haven't had a chance to talk to the committee or anybody else, but a mileage-based user fee is after people's activity. How far do they go? I am much more interested in the efficiency impact on the environment than I am on what person does. If they're incredibly efficient and they come out with their vehicle and pedal the hell off of it, and they go a long, long ways without putting emissions into the air, more power to them. Why should they have to pay based on how far they went? I'm certainly far more interested that they put less emissions into the air than I am to where their actual activity is. I'm very concerned this is a really bad idea. I'm not interested in eliminating anybody's freedoms as to where they go and what they do, but I am very concerned about the quality of the air and the efficiency of the vehicle. I think this is a horribly bad
I'm
idea
gonna
on my
want you
initial
there when
phase.
we figure out what the rate is for battery electric vehicles. That's what you're arguing.
Well, I'm saying that what we want is cleaner air and, right, I mean, that's what, I'm assuming that's the idea, that's what the idea of reduction. I looked around and say, but I don't think that we want to infringe on anybody's ability
No,
to go as far as they can get on their, whatever the next technology comes out,
but the impact to the roads is how many miles you drive, not how efficient your vehicle is.
based on the weight as well, is a big factor.
Maybe.
And I'm not saying I'm set on this. I'm bringing it out for some people who are talking about policy. I am not sure that this is our intent to what we're talking about to potentially limit activity. We are interested in the impact on the road, but technology usually, maybe not yet today, in this case of electric vehicles, but overall, technology's shown us in most items and most things, they get lighter and they get more efficient and they get easier to use. And pretty soon my combined activity physically might move me down the road at a level far more efficient. And I don't think that I want to go in the direction that locks me into an intent that says, I want to limit personal freedoms. I want to improve the environment. And I'm not sure this is what I want to do. I would like to have everybody drive at least a 50
What
miles per
section
gallon above. There you go.
What section?
I'm right here on section, right above
19.
section, 19 for the Senate,
So
12
that's
for
the
us.
number two.
Their addition number 2. I'm just brainstorming it out since this is my prerogative as the chair and you all have to listen. This is something I'm thinking about. I don't think we're looking at, I don't fully understand it. I'm saying my reaction to this, I don't agree with that intent until I learn more about it. Representative.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a bit premature to say that, because if we were to do this for gasoline cars, then what? Then take away the gas tax?
Mhm.
And then
Then I'm in favor of raising it.
what are drivers from out of state gonna do? So I mean, it's something that have policy discussions about. But this sort of says, this is where we're going. And I'm not sure we're ready to say that that's where we're going. So I'd agree.
This is a no for me right now. I'm not ready to say this, I guess is what I'm saying. I think it's,
Yeah, I'm just a no on the fact, as Phil said, accessible to all motor vehicles, that's why I just don't know if we're there
It might
yet.
be-
Yeah, yeah,
It might be.
yeah,
in
yeah,
the
we might
future,
be, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So,
I'm just interested in anybody else who comes up with an opinion over the next bit. But to me, this isn't exactly directing what I'm thinking, but I don't know yet.
Well, I'm just gonna take the opportunity to, again, bring up that it seems like it would be much easier to attach a tax onto the electricity versus into the whole ERBA, because at least, I mean, I know we've heard the arguments that electric companies can't see what electricity is charging vehicles, but got a level 2 or a level 3 charger, we know it's charging vehicles, and if there were a tax added to that level 2 and level 3 charger, it would be taxing anybody, Vermonter, out of stater, who is charging for their car.
Sort of like they do in gas, I guess. Huh?
Sort of like they do on gas.
I'm not saying I know all the answers. I'm saying my take on this is premature.
I think that policy worked, not for homeowners, but for out of state, but the EV chargers that we have on highways and wherever. We could easily, tax those. Tax, I'm sure, not sure why we haven't.
If you, sorry, this is probably getting out of my area here, but, so like,
It's
if you have,
certainly getting out of transportation, generally known areas go.
yeah, if you have a level 2 smart charger at home that tracks so that you can pay a differential rate, then presumably the utility knows when you're using it and can track it there. So, for example, they can set it up so you only charge at low load times on the grid so that you're not, turning on your car charger at the same time as all the air conditioners go on in the summer, et cetera. But then for like a level 1 where you're just plugging into a 15 amp outlet, or a non-smart level 2 charger that just runs off of a 30, 40, or 50 amp circuit, then you wouldn't be able to tell at that point. So, but I mean, some of this gets into, you've got 2 questions here. One is user pays for the highway structure versus social engineering questions of what policy things do you want to promote? And that's always the tension that we have with the policy around, especially taxes and fees, is question of paying for the services provided versus engineering, sort of providing incentives within the market space to either do or not do a certain activity. So.
Representative Burke?
Yeah, and just looking at some research here, all but 10 states have participated in some kind of, either have an active program, VMT, for passenger vehicles, or have a program for heavy vehicles, or a pilot program, or research and participation. So there are only like 10 states that have no involvement at all in this.
I think it's important that we understand how we're going to charge vehicles in the future.
They have different ways of charging.
Pilots,
Pricing varies by
efforts.
state, et cetera. I mean, I think it's interesting, I'm assuming, people are gonna look into this, and looking carefully at what other states have done. So,
I'm it's off in a little bit of a rabbit hole for a while, and I'm happy to go back to where we were, but something to think about when we're thinking about policy is where we go. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative
If
Casey.
you do go to, or if you take off in your vehicle and go, I've said this before, if you drive to Florida, right, and if you go off your miles, you come home, you got all those extra miles from when you drove on your vacation. I might not like the idea of having to pay a tax to the state for the roads when I wasn't using them for, say, 3,000 or 4,000 miles.
Right.
But I wouldn't
So,
like it on electric either. It's just not fair, no matter how you do it. I guess you could say it to if you're gonna do a mileage-based user fee for gasoline vehicles too in the future. You you're paying gas tax too. I don't know how that would work. I think it's getting into the weeds a little bit further than we need. I think the problem is electric vehicles don't pay anything now. And so how that all gets figured out, I just hate to see it spill over into gasoline driving people, you know, I mean, that's me. I'm not bothering nobody. I'm paying my fuel tax. I don't mind paying it. Personally, it wouldn't bother me if I had to pay a couple extra cents. Because I see that we're not each year we're using less and less gallonage, so probably gonna roll.
I agree.
Yeah, you know, so I think we're getting agreement, this is getting in front of our skis here.
Yeah,
I think
right.
it's our intent. And it doesn't change the bill at all if we just keep that out of there.
Mhm.
It's not, there's no action, you know, there's nothing anybody's gonna do about that, other than Jim and many others are gonna go, what? What are we doing? And we haven't decided to do anything. So it just causes a lot of angst. In my opinion.
And policy that we did not talk about in this committee.
No,
So it's out of, I think it should go.
that everyone spoken.
All right. I got us way.
All right.
Let's get back to where we need to.
Yeah, so the next section, which there's no corresponding House section, is 20 in the Senate. It's up on the screen behind me here. This is just a report back from agency on how the design process is going, September 30th, December 15th. So it's basically this is so we know, did you get the federal grant? Did the funding come through? Do you have enough? That sort of thing. All right. And then the very last line there says, what's your progress? Which will give us some sense going into next session of whether whichever deadline you come up with, whether it's July 1, 26, January 1, 27, or some other date, this will give you a sense of, are they on pace to be able to implement at that point. Sections 14 and 21 are identical. Section 22, 23, 24, and I believe 25 are the vehicle miles traveled pieces in here. So this was discussed in this committee in the context of what's called Kurt's bill. I can't remember the bill number in the House. And this is a trimmed down version that the Senate added following amendments or incorporating amendments from AOT. So first is just adding in the definition of vehicle miles traveled. The next is saying that the agency's mission statement should include the need to reduce vehicle miles traveled within the state when feasible. The third is a statement of policy that in choosing between improvement to existing highway and complete reconstruction, that the agency weigh, doesn't mean that they have to prioritize, but that they should weigh opportunities to reduce vehicle miles traveled or otherwise reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to the highway. And then the final piece is that when they're developing the transportation program, one of the objectives that is supposed to be considered is striving to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. So, so this is not necessarily always achieving a reduction in vehicle miles traveled, but is attempting to do so where feasible. And so that's where the Senate came down with those pieces. And this, I think it cuts out about half of what was in Kurt's bill, roughly. And so it's a partial step in the direction of what was in that bill, but not all.
The section, the whole bill was like 40.
Oh, no, just these sections.
Oh, I was just saying, oh my God, they really, yeah.
No. They took a few small pieces of that bill, And this was one of the small pieces. It may have been the only small piece, actually, now that I think about it. So. Questions, thoughts, concerns?
So, I did some research on this way back when we started discussing the things that I didn't understand with the better roads and miles traveled, and brought me back to my college days when I did some urban planning courses. And reduced miles traveled is a metric which is used within a location. If you apply that in an urban environment, it decreases noise pollution, it decreases air pollution, it provides better for bike-ped relationships, and it basically makes it a friendlier, more condensed type of thing. Mile traveled in a rural environment is actually a counter indicator of economic progress. If you have less miles traveled, you don't have economic vitality within the rural areas. In fact, I think it's a direct detriment to Killington, for example, which planned to put $8 billion into a facility which is going to attract people. And so if we try to say we want to reduce the miles traveled, that means we want to take one of the legs out from underneath the state of Vermont's economic vitality. So those are very broad terms, and reduced miles traveled is a good thing for urban environments. And maybe that's the type of wording we should have where there's one urban environment that is defined, and that's in Burlington. The rest of it, the metrics does not apply. In fact, it's detrimental to the good public policy where you want to have a vibrant.
All right, Representative Lally, you're up.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit on that. I think that the potential exists to achieve a lot of benefits through a vehicle miles traveled approach if we look at it very specifically in terms of the designated areas that are under consideration right now. They're being drawn up by the RPCs. These are the areas where we want to focus housing, and that in places that are either currently served by water and sewer or could be, right? So I think in those locations, this makes a tremendous amount of sense. I agree with you that, writ large, there are some problems. I mean, we have a rural state. So it's just, you raise the image of Burlington, and one of the things that I would like us to see is that we enable communities to become more like Burlington. Rutland, for example, certainly in my community, Shelburne, would like to get sort of a touch of that. Again, it's going to be very context specific, but I think that this just elevates the utility that is hiding in plain sight in these settings that could be leveraged for better uses, and it would make delivery of a lot of services less expensive. Because, again, to go back to the fact that we're a rural state, we can't put sidewalks everywhere, but if we can focus them in places where we do expect that people can walk, will want to walk, then that's a really good use of resources. So I would just, encourage us to think a little more expansively about where this might apply, but also more strategically about where it would apply.
Have to agree with that change.
Representative White?
Yeah, and I just further on the reduced vehicle miles traveled, I think about that goal, whether it's urban or rural, is about enabling areas of the state to be more friendly to alternative modes of transportation like biking and pedestrian, which does reduce our greenhouse gases, and reduces the use of roads, et cetera. But I think about, tourists, like, attracting tourists from out of state or from other areas into an area that has, more bike ped friendly, structures. Like, I don't think the vehicle miles traveled is referring to traffic that's coming from away to enjoy this urban or rural environment. And I actually think that even in a rural environment, that when you've got bike paths, mountain bike trails, et cetera, that does attract people driving from other areas, and they are arriving by car, but they are attracted because we are offering areas of our state that allow for other types of recreational travel. Thank you.
Okay, next session. All right, see what I started. All right, let's go.
All right, next 5 sections relate to demand response transportation. Section 26 of the Senate bill appropriates $600,000 in one-time funds from the transportation fund. So if you remember back in section 3 of the Senate bill, we took 1.15 million from the pilot fund to pay for non-federal disaster relief in local areas. Of that 1.15 million, 600,000 that was freed up from the transportation fund would be used for these grants to public transit agencies to hire individuals to coordinate volunteers. And then section 27, this is requiring a report back from the Department of Vermont Health Access to the Joint Fiscal Committee relating to the contract that they have to execute with the next entity to provide the non-emergency medical transportation under the Medicaid program, which is one of our demand response transportation programs. The Department of Vermont Health Access is opposed to this language. In particular, the request that they provide a detailed analysis demonstrating that the contract will not impact the financial stability of the state's public, or will maintain the financial stability of the state's public transportation systems, goes beyond what they're allowed to consider under Medicaid rules. So they are particularly concerned about that. I misspoke this morning. I said that they were working on language with the Public Transit Association. That is not the case. This is language that is Department of Vermont Health Access has identified legal concerns with under the federal regulations and had requested that it comes out in the Senate. There is not alternative language being workshopped, which I had thought there was. And that's just what it is at that point.
I will say for the members that the speaker and the chief of staff and the head of the health care committee and the human services committee are all putting a meeting together to find out what needs to be done for the Department of Health. And the memos have been flying and emails have been flying and making sure that this gets addressed. My understanding from this morning was that the Senate ran out of time to wordsmith it all and to get it nailed down. So there are people that are in this area that spend all their time in this area working on finding a language change and fix so that their concerns are addressed. That's my understanding. It's a little bit out of our area, but it is the transportation, but the medical side of it, anyway, they spend a lot of time in it. We don't. They're looking to make sure that we're not in violation of federal law and that there is other people working on it. Yes, Representative Bowden.
No, so their concern is that we don't go against federal law, or they are concerned that providing these contracts to which is part of the braided thing, that providing it to public transit.
They're concerned that they cannot consider the health of the state's public transportation systems in awarding the contract. So they have specific requirements under federal regulations and state procurement regulations or rules that require them to do the bidding process in a certain way. They're not allowed to consider, well, they can be involved in improving coordination within the transportation systems. When it comes to their contracting, the concern is that they have to be focused on the Medicaid program and just this non-emergency medical transport within the Medicaid program and getting the best deal for the Medicaid program.
What's cost?
It's cost and services. So while the cost and services picture may mean that it goes, currently the contract is with the public transportation agencies. While it may mean that it goes back to them because they're the people who can most reasonably provide it, they can't, in figuring out the contract, determine, simply award the contract based on or include in their analysis and determination of how to award the contract, an analysis of the financial stability of those systems. That has to be done elsewhere by the state, is essentially what they're saying. And my analysis of the federal regulations, and I am not an expert in this area, but I have reviewed as much as I can. This seems to be consistent with the federal requirements there. My colleague, Jen Carby, who also not an expert, but is more familiar than I am, agrees that this seems to be consistent with the general restrictions around Medicaid. And so the concern is that if they run afoul of that, the federal HHS could come in or the Center for Medicaid Services again. I'm not an expert in that area. Whoever's responsible for that funding stream could come in and restrict the use of federal dollars to pay for this program. And so that's the concern with Section 27. So again, DEVA's asked that it comes out. There, as the chair has alluded to, there is a flurry of activity going on behind the scenes with folks consulting and trying to figure out if there's a way to get information back on this process and how it's going to continue to serve the state's interest in ensuring that we have a sustainable transportation system without running afoul of that, particularly given the stepped up concern at the federal level about reducing what the current administration sees as abuse of federal programs or waste of federal dollars. So that being said, there was certainly an interest in the Senate on having additional transparency around that issue of how will this continue to serve and integrate with the rest of our demand response transportation. And the language that was originally in here, which is significantly trimmed down in what you see in front of you, was based on language that we have had in prior budgets going back to at least 2 or possibly 3 contract renewals in the last 10 years. And we did get a report back in at least 2016 based on that language. I have not had a chance to search out additional reports in the interim. But so it's an ongoing discussion. And I think, I'm just going to stop
there.
there.
The language is the same as what was used before, but now it's getting highlighted.
This language is significantly trimmed down from what was used before.
Okay.
The Senate, as they were coming to the finish, took out, I want to say 3 or 4 items that were in the list that seemed to be clearly that DEVA had a very clear objection to, and further analysis and reviewing their memo and receiving a couple additional emails from them, that they continue to have objections to this language and would prefer that it comes out even in its trimmed down version.
So one last question on that. Who does the actual awarding? Is it DEVA?
DEVA is the agency that would award the contract to provide this transportation.
And public transportation as a whole group provides a bid?
That is, you've gotten outside of my area of expertise, but I know we have the representative of the Public Transit Association in the room, so he may be able to provide you with an answer.
If you're comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie Fee on behalf of the Vermont Public Transportation Association. Since VPTA does own the current contract, so the contract for VPTA who then works with their member providers and providing the service. We will be applying the next round, so we have no position whatsoever on this particular provision. Wouldn't be appropriate for us to speak.
Representative Gordon? Yeah.
So where did the pared down language, where was the language that we pared down? Was it always in a DMV bill or was it in human services
It was
under a DEVA bill?
in the big bill
In the big-
historically,
So it was never in transportation. And
not that I'm aware of.
suddenly it appears here in the Senate? I mean,
Yeah, the Senate added it. The Senate did a series of hearings on it. The initial hearings were focused on medical transports,
okay.
which includes this both Medicaid non-emergency transportation and also the older Vermonters. I always get this name wrong. I don't have it in front of me. Can I phone a friend here with Jamie in the room?
Older adults and adults with disabilities.
Yes.
Yeah. But these just seem like they're human services issues. I know it's the transportation, but it's connected to the services that DEVA and the older Vermont disabilities.
So the initial hearing in the Senate was Senate Transportation and Senate Health and Welfare. And then the agreement was that because it was focused on the transports, they would put it into the T-bill as a vehicle to move it. But yeah, this was a joint effort at first.
Let me see if I can help from again, a layman's perspective in terms of this issue. The Transportation Committee or the chair is looking at and concerned about the amount of changes in rural hospitals. Dialysis was mentioned, other pieces are going, people are gonna have to travel longer distances, more places for different appointments because there are service cutbacks in hospitals. We don't hear anything about that in this committee per se, but they're saying that the push for this is that more transportation is going to be needed. Volunteers haven't returned since the level of pre-COVID. And when you have members of the Senate Transportation and in the appropriations, they went out and found money in the pilot payment in lieu of taxes area, put it into the T-bill, converted it to the town highway non-federal so they could spend it in transportation related money to build volunteer coordinators across the state at the discretion of the transportation to award out to providers to encourage more volunteers, recruit them, and try to make sure these services we're in a spot to provide these services. And that is my understanding of the overall.
Yeah.
And we as a committee or as a conference committee have to decide, are we good with all of this pulling and making and putting it all together to create positions to try to encourage, recruit, and manage volunteers on a $600,000 that came into transportation from a different area. There are people at the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns that mentioned very clear to me, this is the third time that the legislature has already dipped into the extra money in the pilot funds, and they are not, they thought that was meant for payment in lieu of taxes and not for special programs. I'm not saying that's our position. I'm saying that's I've heard that already in the piece. But our issue on the conference committee was to the direction of they're not agency positions, they're provider positions, but they're say that it's one-time money. Are we in favor of trying to recruit more volunteers and build up volunteers and give the agency some leeway to how to make sure they're in a better spot to provide medical and non-emergency transportation? And that, I think, is what we have to they're going to fix the language to make sure that we're not in violation of the federal law, but are we in favor of this huge creation?
My point is, I don't, if it's a health and human services area, which it seems like it is, because it's Medicaid, I don't know why it's in this committee. It should be in human services. That's my point.
Here it is. Well, we've already had, this will be the third thing in 24 hours, right? It was not what we expected. So, yeah, so it's in the transportation bill. The 600,000 is in appropriations and may have already been approved,
Yes.
is what we heard. It's a question of whether we're going to agree to go along with what this has been created. It really, the details of it, in a way, I don't want to, that is going to keep getting worked on. Whether we're in favor of this creation or not, is really our.
It's also worth maybe breaking this out into 3 different pieces. So the first piece is the $600,000. That's section 26. The second piece is this report back from DEVA on their contracting process. That's section 27. Really 4 pieces. But the third and fourth piece are related. So section 28 gets at this issue of one of the problems that's been reported with recruiting volunteer drivers is that apparently under federal regulations, and this is DEVA's position, but there are concerns that they may be reading things too broadly, I think is a safe way to characterize the concern here. There are about 8 background checks that a volunteer driver needs to go through in order to be able to drive for the Medicaid non-emergency transportation program, which means that if you're pulling from a pool of drivers who drive for all of these different demand response programs, essentially, if they're going to be able to drive for Medicaid on top of the other programs, they have to pass a whole bunch of additional background checks, which there is not agreement about whether they are necessarily required or whether everything that's being caught is rejecting drivers needs to be a reject on the drivers. Are there potential offenses that may show up on a background check but don't go to the safety of the individual or the ability of the individual to provide safe transport? And so section 28 is a report back from DEVA in consultation with Public Transit Association, AOT, and others regarding whether there are certain things that are catching people out on the background checks and preventing them from being a volunteer who drives for the Medicaid program that maybe shouldn't pop up as a flag. And then,
Right?
Yes, yeah.
the next part of this,
Ron,
Sorry. You're always welcome here.
thank you so much.
He's not. No, she's not, whoever it is.
so the fourth piece here, the fourth section is really just outreach. So you've really got this issue of low volunteer capacity. So we've got volunteer coordinators and then a study looking at, is there an issue with the background checks that can be fixed to help some more of those volunteers who we are able to recruit to actually drive for the Medicaid program? The second piece is this report back from DEVA. And then the third piece is outreach, which is, it is what it is, but it's thinking of ways like when someone gets a license or renews their license, could DMV give them a flyer about volunteering as a driver in one of these programs? When you renew your registration, Could you get information about how to renew or how to volunteer? Things like that. And then Diva itself is, again, because of conflict of interest concerns, they're just providing information about the ability to get rides through the program, not necessarily providing coordinating outreach with VPTA or whoever the successor contractor might be, whether it's VPTA or another entity. So, and I see Rep. Pouch has a question.
Yeah, I guess, I'd say, and I think I said this before, and we've heard it from many of the public transit folks who do this now, they're the ones who do it now, saying that when they can have volunteers, it costs everyone less. And we are providing the rides we are required to provide. And so we know there's going to be going in the future more rides to be provided. So it sort of makes sense if we can do a better job. And I think some public transit agencies maybe do a better job than other public transit agencies at finding volunteers because it takes grassroots. I think we heard somebody say they go to the that's Amvex or, somewhere where you've got, retired people and they hit them up and say, hey, would you be a volunteer driver? So it seems like, doing it on doing it with this, outreach money, I'll call it, this money on how to do it better, find the best practices of doing it and having coordinators that provide the wherewithal to organize drivers and do all that seems like a good idea. And all the other things seem to, help support the volunteer driving program. As far as the contract goes, that's sort of one piece, that maybe we shouldn't get too involved in, but it seems like it's money well spent because you've got to provide these rides. And if you didn't have volunteers, it would be costing the state a lot more.
Has our Human Services Committee looked at it, like the Senate's Health and Welfare?
I don't know that they have.
Send it to them. Get it out, send it to them. To me.
Well, so
I don't get it.
it's a conference,
I
can't
mean,
give them our conference bill. But we can have, maybe, we can discuss that, how we can get them involved.
This
This is
still is in
the email?
conference.
oh,
Yeah,
this is the T-bill.
Yeah.
yeah. So we are in conference. You could say,
Yeah.
I mean, take it all out. Or you could say, take out, these pieces that are objectionable and these pieces which are not. And there's nothing that prevents you from having their chair or members of their committee or their committee itself weigh in on this and provide advice to the conference committee, but ultimately the conference committee's got to negotiate it. And yeah, I can't speak for the Senate. They did a lot of work on this though, so I have to imagine that at least some portions of this they're going to want to hold on to. Right now,
Yeah, well,
yeah, I
It's
think
probably their biggest piece. And they went through quite the machinations to get the money and transfer it and put it.
$7,000?
Yes, for this year.
So that's my point. This is not T money. Is this T-bill?
it is T fund money.
Well, it is because they brought in 1.1 million from pilot money, put it in, and that's my perception. I don't know, sound too simple, but they pretty much in effect converted the pilot money into the town highway non-federal disasters, then took money out of non-federal disasters to pay for this. So in effect, it's
I
not
consider it
original
pilot
T-
money.
It's not T fund money from the original pot that we worked from.
Okay, so let's fast forward to next year. Then what happens?
That's my
Do we
concern.
have to
It's-
absorb this in which we have no money? Unless you-
They're part-time people, but
Okay,
again,
money.
once you get in the
And
door.
they're not agency people either.
We
But-
could, yeah. There's obviously issues. Obviously, they spend probably a month on this with testimony and it's like falling on our lap, but we have to discuss that, it's like how we get up to speed, or if we can.
Yeah, I'll just add. I don't remember our committee having testimony about the need for more volunteer coordinators or more volunteer drivers, or we heard a lot about public transportation, the different sectors but so I personally feel like I have no idea if this is a good idea. So I feel like the three of you will have to learn from Senate and make a good informed decision, but I can't offer anything. And that's it.
My concern is next year.
And I think it's a great
I mean,
concern. Yeah.
we have no money and we know that. They know we have.
That's why they
no money,
went somewhere
because
else.
they're pulling it from
In my
somewhere
opinion,
else.
that's why they went somewhere else to get it.
Right.
So,
But they're playing devil's advocate. They think that once this gets up running, is that money is gonna be there.
For transportation or through health. and
Well,
human
just
services.
savings of getting people on board and the cost savings are, well, probably won't be realized in the T fund, it'll be realized in the
Correct.
big.
Not ours.
Yeah,
It's not our.
and then when they come back for public transit
yeah,
request for the budget next year is where they'll have to decide, are they asking for it or not?
yeah.
So we either gotta push through the last bit or take a break because we're definitely at the end of our straight amount of time. I mentioned the ultra low volume cars. This is the stuff, right?
Yes,
So asking the agency to come back with a recommendation, is there a way
Yeah.
to, I'm asking the agency or the DMV either way, they're asking motor vehicles to come back and say, is there a way to provide VIN numbers and or deal with emissions? Is under the low bill, they brought this car in, had a whole big show with it and whatnot, these type of vehicles anyway, these kit cars. So they're asking them to come back with a recommendation. It's not a new law, it's asking DMV to come back with a recommendation, right?
Yeah,
Of whether or not we are willing to register kit cars and or look at their emissions in a different way. Are we willing to give them some kind of rider on the emissions? So in my perspective, they're asking the DMV to come up with a policy and or position, right?
yeah, and there was a technical, because they wanted to be exempt from emission standards.
yeah, so you'll see in B1, it says examine the potential to waive some or all Vermont motor vehicle emissions requirements. And the conference committee is discussing amending that to examine approaches taken by other states with respect to vehicle emissions requirements for these vehicles, because I think California, they don't exactly waive the requirements. They have a different approach to these requirements. I don't know the full details, but this also leaves open the option of, instead of waiving the requirements, we still test for emissions, but we're saying you don't have to have an EPA certified emission system, which is the big issue, as I understand it, is that's a 7-figure process to get your emission system certified. And for a small manufacturer, that's not necessarily something that you can do, but there are other ways. In California, at a minimum, is one of the entities that has a program to deal with these cars. So, but yeah, so that's the only real thing there, besides it just being language you didn't have. Then there are the rail leases in section 32. We discussed this the other day. Last year, the T-bill removed the requirement that a rail lease extension be approved by the General Assembly or the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee. The Senate has proposed to add back in the requirement that it be approved by the General Assembly or Joint Transportation Oversight. There are 4 of these leases in the state. The rail lines range in distance from about 15 or length from about 15 miles to over 100. And the leases are for differing amounts. In some cases, the rent is fairly low to reflect the desire to keep, as I understand it, rail service going, but reflecting that economically it wouldn't be something that a private railroad would bring on their own without some sort of arrangement with the state.
Well, Ledge Council provided, maybe I didn't share it yet or not, but There's 4 leases, the next lease renewal is not till 2030. No railroad enters into a 2 or 3 or 4 year type of scenario, the amount of money it costs to be involved in railroad business, the equipment, et cetera. These are all 10-year leases with already pre-negotiated 10-year plus renewals. There's not another lease coming up due till 2030. The committee did this last year. I don't remember doing it. I use that line all the time. I haven't said that one in a while, but I don't remember doing it. But I know that in speaking to last year's vice chair, that we did do this last year and the chair did it. And now we're gonna go seem to undo it. That, to me, that seems a little, I don't know if disrespectful is the right word, but I'm not that keen on changing the work that the committee just did last year. Especially if there's not a lease renewal for another 5 years. We've got next term to come and find out what the issue may or may not be. So that's my kind of, but certainly, we don't know what's going on with all the, or I should go back and listen to last year's testimony why we did it. Representative
I'm
Burke?
just wondering, I mean, I know Senator Harrison was promoting this.
Mhm.
I haven't actually talked about it besides the fact that she was something that she was interested in, but I just wondered what her reasoning was.
I think she feels that the state can maybe maximize a little bit more money on subcontracts with utilities, doing things along the right of way and things of that nature. We've been told that that's probably not really a possibility. One of the questions that I asked Michelle is like, we've had this forever. We just changed it last year, so what the heck is a big deal going back to the way it was? If it's always been like that. And she said, well, a lot's changed because this thing was originally like 100-year-old, maybe not 100 years old, but it's been a statute for quite some time. Just a lot of things on the federal level of what's allowed and not allowed as far as the do's and don'ts, what's on the railway. We can't control basically anything of not allowing rail to do, what they need to do. So there's not really much substantive things that our body can weigh in. His way was relayed to me. Senator Harris was more concerned about potential of other revenue, which I'm all ears, but it doesn't sound like that's a reality.
I remember this as well. When we took the testimony
Yeah.
in the section, it was a lot of discussion about the right of ways and about, we talked about the 1111 crisscross. Apparently, the way I was really clearly remember, you can cross these right of ways and work with the railroads to go across. But there's a reason that the electric lines and the sewer lines and the water lines, you can't run this stuff down the railroad. We can go back to the testimony, but you can't run these things with it seems like, right? You got the interstate, why aren't the power lines, the sewer lines and everything? That's not the way it works on these channels. The same thing with the railroad. You can crisscross them, but you can't run through them, which really limits when they were really trying to look at taxing, they were going after the cable provider piece and whatnot, and that they don't run along them, they run across.
There is language in some of the leases relating to location of utilities along the right of way. But it all contains caveats too, and in some cases it seems to contemplate if the right of way has to close down because of gas lines that have to be routed that way. This is probably a bigger question with a lot more nuance to it as to what you can and can't do and what federal approvals you need. One of the things that's worth noting just on the money issue is the little whacker subsidy that we talked about, the fix. That was actually the subsidy provided pursuant to one of the lease agreements. Because the operating revenues are so low on the little whacker, the state was providing $5,000 a week to subsidize the operation of that line. So, and that ended this year.
Oh, yeah, we're well aware of that.
But that's one of your, that is one of the pieces though that dated back from whenever the lease was signed, which I think was in the early 80s. But it's, so that the context of the leases is also tied to an era when the state was acquiring some of these lines when the previous railroad was in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different operating pieces in there. I can't speak to whether, it's too in the weeds or too complicated, or, how prescriptive the federal regulations are.
Yeah, that's what we're late is,
I think-
that they are prescriptive, and maybe we gotta flush that out.
Yeah. That's my summer to-do list, is to get a better idea of what the FRA regs are.
Certainly go back to what we took for testimony and look at it. Yeah. Spend all this time to go ahead and make the change. Now we're going to turn immediately undo it. This doesn't, as a new chair, it doesn't sit well with me.
So sections 33 and 34, fairly straightforward. This is the dig safe marking times being extended from 48 hours to 72 hours after notice. This is tied to a bill that passed last session and omitted these two sections, which I understand that was not the intent. This has passed in the first version of the budget adjustment, which was vetoed by the governor. I believe it is in the most recent version of the budget adjustment, but because of concerns about vetoes, the Senate opted to put it into the T-bill, with the sense that this is a non-controversial issue and it could move more quickly across the governor's desk in this bill. I think one thing that was mentioned that is not in the bill is I don't think those two pass on. Oh, no, they do pass on passage. Okay. I knew that was an update that had to happen at some point. That's been updated. So, but yeah, these would be effective on passage. So that's 33 and 34. So not purely transportation issues, but I think they felt that because the dig safe markings are often on roads and sidewalks, that was transportation adjacent.
What is the dig safe? What is that?
The dig safe, yeah, anytime you need to dig, there is a network basically where the utility companies are contacted to find out if there are pipes or wires that the utility owns that, or cable, that sort of thing, that utility owns that runs under where you're supposed to be digging. So like when I did the addition on my house and they were digging they were pushing out the foundation, they just dig saved my entire, basically most of my yard, just in case they had to dig there, and just to find out where's the water line, where's the sewer line.
I think I recall that. We did that so they can't hold up the project.
Yeah, the utilities
Yeah.
have to put in a fund for the dig
Yeah.
safe people, and then they come out.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't dig up a gas line or
Yeah.
electric line.
Yeah.
That would be bad.
Yeah.
Okay, then the last piece that's controversial.
Yep, the last piece is controversial. This is the so-called legal trails, which are, I say so-called because the statute uses the term trail. In most instances, it refers to them as a legal trail in one place that I'm aware of, but our highway maps refer to them as legal trails. These are public rights of way owned by the municipality. The question, as I mentioned last week, is whether under the existing statute, municipalities have the right to maintain these trails. There is a landowner in Tunbridge who is currently in court with the town of Tunbridge over this dispute of whether the landowner or the municipality owns the right to maintain the trail based on changes that were made in the mid-'80s to the statute. This language here, depending on which side of that argument you come down on, would either clarify the municipality's right to maintain the trails or take the right from landowners and give it back to municipalities to maintain the trails. If it is the latter, it is taking a property right, which we know under both state and federal constitution, you have to pay property owners for any property rights you take. So there is a concern about whether this would be a taking. There was also a concern from the property owner. So right now, the nature of the case in front of the court is what's called a declaratory judgment, which is basically when you ask the court to tell you what the law is. So look at this statute, tell us what the law is. The concern is that even though we have 1 VSA 213 and 214, which say legislation doesn't affect pending cases unless it's a procedural thing, is that because the law would change, the court would say, well, that's no longer the law. I don't have to tell you what it is anymore because it's no longer that question is now moot. The law has changed, which would mean that they would have to restart the lawsuit process under a takings lawsuit, saying that when the law changed, you took my property right. And then the court would have to go back and start over again. So there is a question about both the dispute that's in the courts here and whether taking action now would delay the outcome of the resolution of that dispute. There are other arguments over questions of whether private property owners can afford to sue the state, et cetera. But given time and so forth, I don't want to dig in too deeply. I'm happy to go into a longer discussion of these issues.
Got the briefing from you as the general overall concept, but we did not, I wasn't sure if you were clear about that this morning in the conference committee, is that we heard from you as a briefing to the committee, and then you can take any additional testimony from either side. And everything is just our briefing from you in preparation for this, and that's as far as we're.
Yeah, so that's
as far as we're going into it, until,
yeah.
Depending on what the conference committee decides to.
The Senate took testimony from the town, from the landowner, from other interested parties.
We didn't do any of that.
And you did not do that. You got my overview. It was pointed out to me by the property owner that I had left out the part about the potential delay in the case if the court decides it's a moot issue. And then the questions of how do you come back at that point, and can folks afford to do a takings lawsuit and so forth. But
Pouch has a question.
Yeah, and I apologize if did this go into the bill because of that lawsuit in an attempt to correct everything? Because that doesn't seem like that. Or was this already an issue and now we're trying to fix it and there also is a lawsuit?
so
Why did it get put in here?
I think the why did it get put in here is that the vice chair of the Senate committee asked the committee to consider this issue and advocated for its inclusion, and the committee voted ultimately to include it. In the same way that Senator Harrison asked for the inclusion of the rail lease language, and the committee considered it and then voted to include that. As for the motivations for introducing the legislation, I don't think it's appropriate for me to speculate or share client confidences on that. There was a House bill last biennium that wasn't reintroduced this biennium. That was, as I understand it, more or less identical on this language, but this has been brewing for a while. The lawsuit has been going on for several years, as these things do. So it's been up and down to the Supreme Court once already. And depending on where things go from here, may end up there again.
Could one make the case that there was motivation one way or the other? And could we get sued for interjecting in a current lawsuit?
So,
Boy, that's
it is not inappropriate for the legislature to change the law while a lawsuit is ongoing. That said, if you enact a change in the law that results in a taking, then you can see lawsuits either against the state or municipalities or both for that taking, depending on the nature and the legal theory behind it. And I'm not a takings expert. There is a risk if you enact this law and the court rules in favor of the landowner, that we will now be facing takings lawsuits where not only will we have to defend the lawsuits, but we will have to pay out monetary damages for the property that's been taken. So that is a risk.
Representative Burke?
I think that we can get some information from one of our colleagues, whose constituent this is. So I would do that.
Okay. Representative what?
It's, just regarding, I mean, this whole takings lawsuit potential, that can only go forward if it is actually deemed that property that was previously a town highway
And-
actually reverted to the abutting landowners. I mean, it was a
Yeah.
town highway.
Yes.
And
So,
it's now like a public right of way. And the argument is over who's maintaining it, but,
who has the right to maintain it?
okay.
So that the issue here, and this is
No, man, get you there.
getting into it a bit, but the issue is basically trails used to be grouped with class 4 roads as part of the town highway system, where the town had discretionary authority to maintain them as long as they didn't do so in a discriminatory manner. When the statute was updated in 1986, they pulled trails out from town highways and said legal trails are public rights of way that are not a town highway. And then they were silent on maintenance. The landowner's argument is that as a Dillon's rule state, where we have to grant towns their authority, by being silent where before we had spoken, it showed legislative intent to take away that authority to maintain. The town's argument is that if you have a right of way, if you own that property, naturally what comes with it is the right to maintain it for the use for which you hold it. That can include cutting the trees back when you have a right of way to run power lines. That includes repairing class 4 road, etc. I think both sides have made some compelling arguments. I don't think I'm in a place where I can comfortably give you a realistic, like, I think this side is likely to win or not. And I think at this point, we are waiting to hear what the court decides on the towns. Clearly, if the landowner wins, there's going to be a big question for this committee about whether it fits for towns to continue to have trails, and if so, how do you provide for maintenance of them? That raises some serious questions there. Some of these trails access state forest and state parkland. They provide other forms of access, etc. There are a lot of parties that have weighed in on this. On the other hand, if towns do have this maintenance authority, there are questions about, should we clarify the statute so that somebody reading the statute knows what rights they do and don't have when they have a trail running across their property? And so that towns know 15 years from now, when everyone's forgotten what we did, what rights they do and don't have. So I think no matter what, even if you do something, then likely we'll have some additional changes. There is a risk with moving forward with the maintenance language. There are also benefits to moving forward with it as well. I spent about 2 hours going through these with the Senate committee before they decided to vote this language out. That's I think where we're at with it is it's not a simple issue. It seems like it should be. And then you start to get into the legal arguments and the statutory history, and it becomes much, much weedier and more complicated. And then at the bottom of this is the fact that, unlike other situations where we have a pending court case, there is a property right at issue here, which could lead to implications for the state. It'd be very different if we were having an argument over like the speed limits or something like that, and what we meant in a certain speed limit statute. There we could clarify the statute ahead of the court, and the court could still resolve the violation. the case over whether there was a violation or something like this. Something like that. In this case, because we're dealing with a property right, there is a potential prospective impact, and a variety of them that are at stake in this case.
I just worry that, I am worried about the consequences of if properties under this designation are all returned to the private property owners and the municipalities are losing all these public trail opportunities that people have been using. So I'm supportive of keeping this in, just personally.
Yeah, they're
Representative Burke,
That was good. Can I ask another question?
we definitely, we spent an hour plus on this before, so hopefully it should look like a review.
They have the right to maintain the trail, but not the obligation, right?
well, so that's the town's argument, is that they have the right to maintain it, but not the obligation. The landowner's argument is that the legislature, by not expressly saying there is a right when they recodified Title 19 in 1986, intended to take away that right. And when you take away a right with a right of way, a public right of way, that right reverts to the underlying landowner, or if it's along the boundary between two properties, it splits between the two property owners. And so, most often this has come up with discontinuances of highways where you don't turn it into a trail. But this is kind of a unique thing where it could have been sloppy drafting, or it could have been legislative intent. And I don't know if many of us were in the building then, and if we were, that we remember that discussion. So,
Just one more thing. So then if it reverted to the landowner, then the landowner would be able to prevent the public from coming on the trail.
so that's the thing, is the public holds a right of way, but the landowner has the right to maintain the right of way, which creates a somewhat bizarre situation where one of the issues right now in the Tunbridge case is that there was disagreement over what the uses of the trail should be. And I don't want to characterize the parties' positions or anything like that, because I'm sure that I would get some details wrong. But part of that case relates to a disagreement over certain uses of the trail. There are additional questions about, the right to maintain. And if you don't maintain, what happens? There are some limited rights for folks moving down a public right of way to do something like pick up a stick and move it off the right of way. But, that doesn't extend to like doing heavy duty work to smooth out holes and repair bridges and culverts, that sort of thing. And so that, it gets very complicated when you get into the weeds of this. But at the core, there's this legal issue of who holds the right to maintain. And that's kind of the core legal issue in front of the court. And that's what this ties to.
So the next meeting is tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in Senate Transportation. And I'm sorry, Representative Lally, but we did bring this piece in, and I can trust me that the watching and the feedback is more than we're going to cover on this particular